Welcome back to another reading. Today we're going to be reading from Time is Changing. And we don't have too many trips with Sandy in it. So I thought today we'd read one with one of her trips where she went alone to meet a very unusual person named Stagecoach Mary. So the quote is from Mother Mary Amadeus Dunn, which actually was the Mother Superior for the convent that Stagecoach Mary had stayed at. When asked how her journey to Toledo was, she reportedly told one of the nuns that she was ready for a good cigar and a drink. So, not exactly the kind of person you'd normally find in a convent. So, Honey acceptably called over the control board to Sandy. "Hey sis, got a minute?" She waited. Sandy could be heard over her return giving one of her staff a dressing down because of something they had forgotten. As she listened, she thanked Providence she had never gotten Sandy that mad at her. Sandy responded once she was through. "Honey, it's great to hear from you. What's going on?" "You requested me to contact you when I had a trip you might be interested in. Well, I've got a humdinger." Sandy immediately walked through the portal, rubbing her hands. "Okay, sis, what you got?" Honey smiled softly and pointed to the dressing room. "Go get changed and I'll pass you through." Sandy walked to the lab, looking over her shoulder. She wasn't too fond of surprises, but she trusted Honey. In the dressing room was a complete frontier outfit. She dressed and then checked the sidearms in the holster. The top half consisted of a man's shirt and a vest with a skirt instead of pants. The holster was hand-tooled with an ivy pattern. The boots were thankfully comfortable. She put on her return under the shirt and sat down opposite Honey. "Okay, are you ready to tell me where I'm going?" Honey opened the book and passed it over. Where and when are unimportant. It's who you're going to meet that's the surprise. Sandy looked at the photo of a woman of 60ish who sported an outfit similar to hers. The face was fierce and the look of a woman who did suffer fools. The name under the picture was Stagecoach Mary. "I didn't think you had ever heard of her, Honey." "I hadn't until you asked me to research a trip for you. When I learned about her life and the way she was, I thought of you and figured she'd be someone you'd want to meet." Sandy grinned. "You're right there. She was a tough one, but she was also an old softy when it came to kids and people who needed help. Maybe I can go on a run with her. It's funny, but I hadn't thought of seeing her myself. I'm glad you did." Honey set the controls so Sandy would arrive on the outskirts of town. On the way to the portal, Sandy veered off and helped herself to a couple of the cigars. Nick had tucked away. He had excellent taste in cigars and had made them available to everyone. Tucking them into a pocket of her vest, she walked through the portal, arriving behind the stables. Sauntering down the street, she climbed the stairs and onto the walkway. Looking out in the window, she saw the general store was busy with people buying necessaries they couldn't make or trade for. Next was an alley with the ice house towards the rear. A tailor shop held a prominent place on the walk, and the suits and dresses in the window were very fine. Next, she passed a tobacconist and then the tavern. As she passed the door to the tobacconist, she bumped into the woman she was here to meet. At the slight bump, Mary spun around. Sandy apologized, but did so without meekness. Mary raked Sandy from head to foot and then grinned in approval. "Come on, sister, I'll buy you a drink." As they strode into the tavern, the barkeeper made an attempt to articulate "no ladies allowed," but when he saw Mary, he checked and stepped backward behind the bar. He brought out whiskey and handed it to Mary with 2 glasses. Mary poured the drinks and offered a glass to Sandy. Sandy offered a cigar to Mary, who appreciated its quality. "Sandy Franks, pleased to meet you." Sandy preferred her hand, which was shaken in a strong grip. "Mary Fields, but I'm called Stagecoach Mary." The 2 ladies drank and talked. Mary spoke of her time in the nunnery and spoke knowledgeably on horticulture. She had been in charge of the garden at the convent. "Tomorrow I have a run back there. Mail is due on the train first thing in the morning. We'll head out early if you care to accompany me." I better warn you, though, it's not an easy run, and I've had to use my guns more than once. If you're game, meet me at the depot when the church clock strikes 9. A man came up behind Sandy. Beery fumes wafted from him, and he wavered back and forth. He turned to the bartender. "Hey, friend, when did we get a new prostitute?" Fred made a warning gesture as Mary rose, fire in her eyes. Sandy pulled Mary back down and slowly rose with a warm smile on her lips. In the lab, Honey scrunched together and winced, knowing full well that the smile hit ice. Sandy didn't waste words, but drove her palm swiftly up into the man's chin. His teeth clicked sharply, and he went over backwards, out cold before he hit the ground. Mary let loose a bellow of laughter. "I wasn't sure about you for a minute there. Guess you'll be there tomorrow right enough. I'll be glad to have a cool head riding with me." Sandy got a room in the hotel and spent the day wandering around town. She stopped into the theater and watched a new movie called The Haunted Castle. For an early silent movie, it was entertaining. Sandy had learned to immerse herself when visiting different periods. At will, she could let go of the present and convince herself that she actually belonged to whatever period she was in. As she told Honey once, "You don't pine for the TV if you convince yourself they haven't been invented yet." Walking back down to the hotel, she saw Mary on the opposite side of the street. She was seated on the board talking to a small boy. As she talked, she was winding a top. With a swift throw and jerk of her wrist, the top whizzed. The boy was in ecstasy as he watched his toy spin, wobble, and topple over. He handed it back to Mary, who wound it up again and sent it spinning. For on to 15 minutes, Mary and the boy played, and then when she finally had to get up, he had the saddest face Sandy had ever seen. He gave her a big hug, then ran outside. Mary walked down the street whistling. She pulled the other cigar Sandy had offered her, and once lit, she sat down on a bench to enjoy it. Sandy walked over and invited Mary to dinner. Mary shrugged, and Sandy led her back to another tavern. After a meal of steak, oysters, and sides, they sat outside and talked about tomorrow. Mary asked to see Sandy's weapon. "Either you keep these awful clean or you don't shoot much. Since people try to rob my stage, it might be a help to see how you shoot." She led Sandy out of town to a wood stand and on a fence placed several chunks of wood. Sandy understood what was required of her and fired off her guns, getting a clean shot on each target. Mary's grin broadened as Sandy asked to try Mary's shotgun. It was a larger gun than Sandy had ever used, and she gave it the respect it deserved. Examining it and checking the sight, she fired off a first shot. The rifle pulled a little to the left, and she adjusted accordingly. Her second shot was close and nicked the target. Mary reloaded and fired off a shot that blew the wood apart. "Looks like we're going to have a smooth ride tomorrow." With that, she went off to her cabin, and Sandy went to hers. Waking early, she didn't bother with eating, as Mary had said they could eat at the convent. Instead, she spent a while cleaning and oiling her guns. The room had a gun maintenance kit on the table. Guess this wasn't too surprising since everyone carried a gun or rifle. She met Mary on her walk to the station. As they waited on the train, Mary talked of the fine meal they could expect at the convent. She had worked there, and they treated her well. She just couldn't handle all the restrictions. The mailbag was duly picked up, and Mary tucked it under her seat. The rifle she placed in a sling in front of her. She angled the pistol in her holster for quick access. Sandy made herself ready as well, and with a snap of the lines, they're off. "Get up!" yelled Mary, and the coach started forward. Sandy looked at the small conveyance, giving it the name of a coach was gilding the lily of bed. Basically, it was a flat cart connected to a horse. Sandy searched her memory, and it came to her. These were called buckboards. "Why didn't they give you a coach instead of this?" Mary patted the coach affectionately. "They didn't give me anything. Mother Amadeus gave me this after I nursed her back to health. It's the only thing I have I really care about, just because it came from her." The terrain was uneven, and great speed wasn't possible. Mary kept a sharp lookout on all sides, and Sandy did the same. Over her earpiece, Honey asked if she wanted her to keep an overhead look and follow them. An affirmative grunt from Sandy, and Honey kept an overview on their position. Sandy was amused to see a hawk suddenly appear overhead. Even more amusing was seeing it wave to her. As the horse trotted over the uneven terrain, the buckboard lived up to its name. They talked as the brush and wild grasses passed by them. Mary was extolling on the horticulture and living with the nuns. Did you like working in the gardens? Mary laughed so hard the buckboard shook. Too much. People messed up what I was doing, I'd get powerful mad. Mother had to talk with me more than a few times about my temper. Well, that and my language. The convent in Ohio was real peaceful. Too peaceful, and I ended up getting put out. I worked a few jobs doing anything I could as I worked my way around. When I heard Mother was ill, I went up to Montana straight away to take care of her. Sandy was looking around her as she listened, and from the right she noticed a small cloud at ground level. Honey noticed it at the same time, announcing two riders coming to intersect them. Sandy let Mary know what she was seeing and what was coming. Lord, child, you must have eyes like a hawk. She brought out a rifle and laid it across her lap. Sandy shuddered a little as the rifle was pointing in her direction. I've got them when they come up. You keep driving. Is that all right? Mary wasn't used to having someone riding shotgun, but allowed Sandy to take the first shot. As the cloud gained on them, Mary saw the two riders approaching hard. Sandy aimed and winged the first. He dropped his weapon and drew the second. From beside her, Sandy heard the blast of a shotgun and felt the warmth of the shot. Looking back, Mary had the reins in her right hand and the rifle was resting on the crook of her arm to steady it. One blast and the second rider was spun out of his saddle and landed hard on the dirt. Sandy fired her second shot and the first rider dropped off backwards from the saddle, landing about 12 yards from his companion. Mary slid the rifle back into its sling, chuckling. Sandy was a little concerned about what she had done and hoped Honey was still keeping an eye on them. Do you think we killed them? Mary kept looking straight ahead. She wasn't concerned with the robbers' welfare. Don't know and don't care. If it's a case of them or us, I choose up every time. Seems you were thinking the same thing since you got your shut off real sharpish. Sandy reloaded her gun and holstered them. Guess I wasn't thinking anything. Good. Clears your head and keeps you calm. You don't have to think if something is life or death. It's your life and their death. Don't give it another thought. Sandy wasn't that hard-hearted and was pleased when Honey reported both riders were up and patching each other up. They were now trying to chase down their horses, which apparently were not of a mind to make it easy on them. When the horses made their way behind a large hill, Honey opened the portal and let them in. They made their way to two empty stalls and began drinking and eating. Honey felt it appropriate to deprive them of their horses after what they'd done. Let them walk back to wherever they had come from. She called Frances and asked if she could please come and unsaddle their new horses, as she wanted to keep an eye on Mary and Sandy. Mary continued along, holding the lines loosely and letting the horses trot along. With a companion as sharp as Sandy, Mary could allow herself the luxury of being a little more relaxed on this trip. Mary talked about the reason she had been kicked out of the convent. Me and the janitor had a set to. He started calling me names I couldn't ignore and wasn't about to stand. He felt I was getting above myself. We were both armed and had drawn against each other. Probably would have shot him then and there if one of the nuns hadn't intervened. The bishop had had enough, and that not even Mother could keep him from turning me out. She gave me this to travel with and Solomon to pull it. In Cascade, I set up a couple of businesses and made enough that when the run came for this route, I was able to bid and win it. It's kept me busy, and it's a fun way to make a living. Sandy was intrigued by this fearless lady who had gone from being a slave to being a strong, independent woman who didn't give a damn what people thought about her. But she had seen that this tough exterior had a warm and loving heart. The remainder of the trip passed safely and quickly as the women talked. At the convent, the mail was dropped off and they were invited to lunch. Seated at the table with Mother Superior, they were fed on a rich soup, warm bread, and dried fruit. Sandy asked the Mother Superior what was the strangest thing that ever happened there. She smiled gently and patted Mary on the arm. It was her arrival. When she was asked how her trip was, she said she was ready for a whiskey and a good cigar. After lunch, they walked around the grounds with Mother Amadeus accompanying them. At a flower patch, Mary let out gas and dropped to her hands and knees. I don't know who you've got tending these, but they aren't doing their job. Have whoever it is get a load of coal dust on these to get rid of the mites. Mary and Sandy were given a room. They took a short nap preparatory to returning to town. When they woke, a mailbag was ready for the return run and loaded aboard. Mary took an affectionate leave of the sisters and called Sandy to climb up. The horse had been fed and watered and was anxious to return home. Mary kept a steady pace, fast enough to get back at a reasonable time and slow enough to not overtire the horse. On the way back, they passed the two desperados who had tried to rob them. They were walking back into town, having been unsuccessful in locating their horses. Honey let Sandy know where the horses were now resided. She had a hard time concealing her laughter. In town, Sandy strolled around for a while and decided to stay a week. Honey agreed to stay on duty, swapping off with Frances and Don on 8-hour shifts. Wilf heard about this from Frances and agreed to do watch duty as well, limiting shifts to 6 hours instead of 8. During that time, Sandy did a run every day with Mary, and they became staunch friends. At the end of the week, Sandy gave Mary some of the best cigars she could find and a bottle of whiskey from the future in a cut glass bottle. Returning home, they did some more research and found out that Mary would die on the 5th of December, 1914. For the next 8 days, she visited Mary once a year, always bringing with her fine cigars and the best whiskey she could find. When Sandy had her last visit with Mary, it was on the 5th of December. Walking through with a heavy heart, she entered town in the early morning and headed to Mary's cabin. Mary stretched out in bed and woke to the sound of Sandy entering. Mary's voice was raspy and her breathing was labored. Land sakes, child, Mary cried. Don't you have another set of clothes? Sandy smiled and sat beside her friend. I bought you a little whiskey. She poured out a couple of shots and they drank them off. Mary licked her lips and drained the glass. Best I've ever had. She took Sandy's hand. You know, you're the only one to ever ride shotgun with me. I was really sorry whenever you had to go. Runs weren't as much fun anymore. I had a couple of more folks try and rob the stage, including the 2 we got. You had to kill them. Can't say it hurt any to do it, but I thought of you at the time. Had there been any other way, I might have let them go for your sake. A tear came to Sandy's eye as a smile passed over her lips. Mary reached behind her and pulled the rifle from the corner. You take this. It might save your life someday. It's always done right by me. Just remember, it kicks a little to the left. She pointed to the closet. I hope I don't offend you, but why don't you take a set of clothes? I won't be needing none where I'm going, but what I'm wearing. I'd like to think of you walking around looking like me. You're about the same height, so they'll fit all right. Folks will get a hell of a fright when they see you down the street and think they're dearly departed. Sandy did as Mary requested, though it brought a lump to her throat. Mary asked her to put them on, and when she did, Mary started laughing till tears ran down her cheeks. Lord, from the back you might be my twin, only you're darn sight prettier than I ever was. Thinner too, but with the coat on, it won't be as noticeable. Sandy sat down and held Mary's hand. Glad you come to see me. I sure miss you when you leave. They talked a while longer until Mary went through a coughing spell and fell back onto the bed. Sandy placed her hand over Mary's heart and felt it go still. She called the doctor, who checked her and closed her eyes. Sandy went to the carpenter and had them make a coffin. Then she went and talked to the sheriff about her funeral. He arranged for it to be the next evening. He put the word out that Mary was dead, and Sandy sat up all night in the cabin with Mary's remains. The next day was a gray day and fit the mood in town. As Sandy walked around dressed as Mary, folks nodded and waved as she passed. A few were startled until she turned around and they saw her face. By 4, the coffin was prepared and she saw Mary placed in it. It was brought to the saloon and a toast went up to her. At 5 o'clock, the street was lined with people, and Sandy was requested to walk in front to the graveyard. Sandy led the way, followed by the coffin, and as they passed, people closed behind, walking the short distance to the grave. Mother Superior had come down from the convent and gave a eulogy. Mary was lowered into the grave, and at the last second, a young man approached the grave and tossed in a small wooden top. He smiled a sad smile as tears flowed. Everyone took turns, a shovelful of dirt each, and filled the grave. Sandy and the Mother Superior hugged when Sandy offered to take her back to the convent. Her offer was accepted. Sandy used Mary's buckboard for the journey. The cart and horse were to remain at the convent, and Sandy would take the train home. On the train, Sandy entered a point midway, offering some seclusion. Honey opened the portal, and Sandy stepped through. On the wall near the armament, Sandy respectfully placed the rifle. After changing, she found a mannequin that she put together and dressed in Mary's clothes. "Don't you want to take them home with you?" "No, there's no way that I could explain them. They'll be safe here, and I can always come up and see them any time." She ran her hand over the coat. Sandy came over to where Honey was, and the two hugged. She smiled and thanked Honey for the trip. "You were right. That was one I needed to go on. If you find some more, let me know. I better get back before Frank gets worried or sets the place on fire." Honey opened the portal, and Sandy grabbed Honey's arm as she passed. "Come on and stay with me for a little bit. I need some of your cheerfulness after that one." As they passed through to Sandy and Frank's hotel, Honey put in a call to Don and let him know she'd be gone for a bit. That evening, Sandy, Honey, and Frank were seated in the garden as Mac bussed around in the kitchen. Sandy had been telling Frank about her trip. Frank was listening closely, and when she finished, leaned back against the tree behind him. "Sounds like an interesting trip. It's been a long time since I went on one, too." He tried to think of something he'd like to go on. For the longest time, they hadn't had time for time travel. But now with the hotel in safe hands, he had time and freedom to travel again. With his background, he wanted somewhere where he could indulge himself. Research was all well and good, but a man liked to eat and eat well. "Don, are you around, buddy?" "Present correct, sir. What the orders for the day?" Frank chuckled. "I want us to go out to dinner. A big burst-your-gut dinner. 15 courses and wine for each one. Think you could find that for us?" Don rubbed his hands and licked his lips. "Well, if there ever was one, I'll find it. Call you back in a few. Over and out, sir." Sandy and Honey were looking at Frank as he had taken his last marble and thrown it over the wall. Sandy was staring open-mouthed. "You do this, and I'm the one who's going to have to nurse you back to health. I don't want to hear you moaning and groaning over for a week like the last time." Honey whispered in Sandy's ear. Sandy high-fived her when she finished. Turning to Frank, she wagged a finger. "If you two are bent on doing this, both of you are spending the week in your man cave on the moon nursing each other. Deal?" Frank held out his hand, and they sealed the deal. Don called back in about an hour. Operation Overeat was on. So that was Sandy's trip to see Stagecoach Mary. So next time we'll be doing a reading from Joe's Journey, as I promised. So that will probably be put out today. And that is where Joe, I'm not sure if you could say Joe got lucky or not, but well, you'll see what I mean in a couple of minutes. So appreciate you visiting and look forward to seeing you on my next reading. Thank you again. Remember that my books and the other books are all available on Amazon, on Kindle, and be more than happy to have you purchase them and read them for yourself. So thank you again. We'll see you next time.